Erev Tov. Good evening to everyone. Welcome to the first of two sessions that are going to focus on what we're going to call the spiritual Middot. The spiritual Middot. Last week, we spoke about educational Middot, how we learn and how we understood the idea that learning in and of itself was a spiritual process. In Judaism, learning is not merely an intellectual exercise. It is a spiritual process. But now we're really going to focus on things that we would categorize as spiritual midot. And we're going to look at, I've got a very ambitious class for us tonight. We're going to look at four of them, and you're going to see that we're going to look at these four because I find them connected to one another. And then next week, we'll look at, I think, three more. So, sorry, I got to get to my, there we go. As we talk about spiritual midot, the four that I want to focus on today are joy, awe, loving kindness, and compassion. Now, why these four? I've always felt that these four need to be understood and taught together because they have a connection, or they have connections one with each other. Joy and awe are very much similar types of feelings, right? They can be overwhelming. They can motivate. They can make us do things, right? They function in very similar ways. And I would argue that loving kindness and compassion also function in very similar ways. Then, if we look at it vertically, we almost sort of see a causality, right? People that are joyful are much more apt to doing acts of loving kindness. People that have awe in the world around them are actually much more apt to being compassionate. And so we sort of see this interesting back and forth with these four of them. And so I feel like they need to be taught together. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at all four of them. And then maybe if we have time, have a conversation. If we run out of time today, that's why I only did three for next week. And I figure we can always tack on the end of our conversation to the beginning of next week if we really, really run out of time. But I'm going to try to be good today. But you know me, I like sources and I like talking about them. So, all right. Oops. So let's start with Simcha, with joy. For those who know the Disney movie, that is joy, actually. A quote that I'm going to start with: the world is enthralled with happiness, but joy is a much more worthy goal. What's the difference? Right? What is the difference between happiness and joy? What do you think? Raise your electronic hands and let's see what we've got. What's the difference between happiness and joy? Beth?
Joy is like the level above happiness.
Okay, so maybe we're thinking about this as a hierarchy and sort of levels of intensity. You're happy, and then joy is sort of that next one above that. Good, I like that. March? You have to unmute.
Oh. Hi. Happiness, I think, is.
Hold on one second, Barb. Hold on one second, Marge, and then I'll have you go.
So I think it's so interesting because I've always had this thing about happiness shouldn't be our goal. Like people say, what do you want for your kids to be happy? And that was never my goal for my kids, but having joy would be.
Why?
And I know, it's a really good question. And when you raised it, I thought I'm totally fine with joy, but I'm as a goal, but I'm
Good.
not fine with happiness as a goal. Joy seems like deeper and in the kind of in the moment. It's joy in what you're doing. And people talk about happiness, it's like a way of being.
Okay, I like that. I think, Marge, that's a great way to bring it up. I think by the end of tonight, you're going to actually understand why you feel that way. I like that. I like that a lot. Barb.
Sorry. Happiness is an emotion, but joy is a more of a state of mind because there's an appreciation. I think of the divine and joy, where you can credit a higher source maybe for the feeling you're feeling.
Okay, so I like that. Happiness is an emotion. Joy is a state of mind. Okay.
Yes.
Diana?
I think there's yes to all of that. Yes, and my two favorite words. I think there's also like a temporal aspect as well, that happy, you kind of go in and out of that happiness. And joy is like, I almost think of more of like an ecstatic state of being. Like that feeling, like, how do I even explain? When you're like doing the horror and you're going around and around in a circle and it's like so happy, but there's like this like sort of ecstasy that comes with that.
All right. Good. I like that.
It's a little more elevated, maybe.
Yeah, back to the hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
Peter, I'll give you last word and then we'll see what Alan Marina says.
I think happiness is just one path to get to joy. I think it's just one thing that can make you. I think there's multiple paths to get to a total state of joy, but I think joy is a total state of being, though.
Okay, I like it. So Alan Marinis, in his book With Heart in Mind, one of the Musar books that I recommended at the beginning of class, writes as follows: getting what you want gives happiness. Once you've enjoyed that gratification, however, the pleasure inevitably dissipates. Joy, on the other hand, dances in the territory beyond want. Happiness is contingent, while joy is unconditional. And it goes on to say, to put the distinction another way, happiness involves a person's body, ego, or mind, because those are the dimensions of ourselves in which we generally have wants and seek satisfaction. Joy, in contrast, fills the heart only when one gets beyond the wants of the body, ego, or mind to connect more deeply, more intensely with beingness beyond oneself. So the way Marinis looks at this, right? Happiness is sort of in our physicality. It's actually something, yes, it's emotional, but it's chemical, right? It's based on filling the needs of our body, ego, or mind. Joy goes beyond that, right? Joy goes beyond it into what is beyond ourselves. And we're going to look at a couple more sources that try to define that. One of the traditional Musar texts called Orchot Tzadikim writes about joy as follows: the quality of joy comes to a man out of the peace and security in his heart without an evil happening clouding it. And a man who achieves his desire without a sad event to mar it will be happy always. His face will glow and his radiance gleam, and his body will be healthy, and old age will not quickly come upon him. So what is Orchot Chaim saying? And I actually struggle with this text. It's not how I understand joy, but it's a traditional text, and I wanted us to kind of look at it and deal with it. What is he saying joy actually is? I actually, Nan, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like, so the happiness here is more like fulfillment. So that's why it's more involved with like physical and everything. And on the other hand, the joy is more like enjoy the thing. So when you are it's my understanding, when you are enjoying a thing, it goes beyond of physical like fulfillment or anything else. You're like, embrace the process, embrace everything. That's my understanding.
Good. I like that. I like that understanding of it. I think, part of the challenge that I have with this text is sort of the qualification of, without an evil happening clouding it. Like everything's got to be good. And that's just not life, right? And part of it is because he's connecting it to peace and security. Now, that makes some sense to me, that we can find joy when we are at peace and we're secure. I think it's hard to find joy, and I can let Marge speak to this much more than anyone else, right? But it's hard to find joy when you are struggling, right? With security, when you're struggling to find peace in your life, it's really hard to find joy. But I think Orchot Tzadikim is actually missing the point. There's not a causal link, right? If you have peace and security, you're not joyful because of that. But not having peace and security can prevent you from feeling joyful. And I think he argues that this is causal, right? If you have peace and you have security, well, then of course you're going to feel joyful. But by the way, there are people who are very peaceful and very secure, and they're not necessarily joyful people, right? So it's not causal in that way. But I would agree with Orchot Tzadikim to say that if you are insecure, if you do not have peace, it's going to be very difficult to find joy. Barb or Neil, I'm not sure which one it is.
Oh, it was me. I had been reading in Israel that somebody's observation had been people were smiling with their mouths but not their eyes. And I was thinking that, which is, you're having happiness but you're really not having joy, like when there isn't security and there isn't peace.
Well, because we're trained on the outside to have this facade of we always have to be joyful, we always have to be happy, right? And part of what comes out of Musar and the Hasidic movement, right? Mitzvah gedola liot b'simcha. It's a great mitzvah to be happy, to be joyful, but it doesn't mean that you're always going to be there. It's something that needs to be worked on and cultivated, which is why it's one of the Musar Middot. That's part of what we're going to talk about in the Middot, is that it's not something that happens automatically. These are things that need to be cultivated. These are things that need to be practiced in the same way that we practice anything else, right? We can't expect to be Jewish and not do anything about it. In the same way, we can't actually expect to have these four that we're talking about, right? Joy, awe, loving kindness, and compassion, without practicing, without bringing that into our life some way. And that's why you'll find in a lot of Musar books, there's always a practice that comes with a midah. And different Musar teachers will tell you different things to do and how to do it. But this is not just about intellect. It's about, okay, how do we find and cultivate joy in our lives? Peter asked me, are these midot the same as sfirot? Sfirot are completely different. Completely different, part of Kabbalah. And those are attributes of God. These are actually attributes of humanity. Now, sometimes God does them as well, but different. Diana.
So I was thinking about just different things that come to mind. I was doing a little word dump with simcha, and I was thinking like moadim besimcha, and how there are certain times where we are, yes, commanded. And I think we've had a lot of conversations recently, or during like the Torah service, about the commandment to be happy. And it's hard, but sometimes I heard a great line. It wasn't fake it till you make it. It's fake it till you become it.
Right.
Which I just absolutely love.
Yeah. Or work it
and-
till you become it, right?
And so that was one thing. And then I was thinking about like v'samachta b'chagecha. And then like where do we see joy? Like we just had Purim and we said La Yehudim hayata ora v'simcha v'sason v'yikar. And they're separating there, like those two things as well. So
Yeah.
we see this over and over and over. You know,
It's hard and
I was going to say we talk about a simcha, like
right.
we use it as a noun.
Well, and the problem for us is that simcha is often translated as happiness.
Right.
And we're really making that distinction between being happy and being joyful.
Right. So I think it connotates more celebration in a way. I don't know. But it's temporal in that Moadim b'simcha especially.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's continue because I can tell already that we're never going to get through all my slides. It's good. I'd rather have the conversation. Mesilat Yesharim, another traditional text. We're not going to go through the whole thing with all the proof texts. I just want to focus on the beginning. He understands joy as service, right? For this is the true joy, namely, that a person's heart delight that he merits to serve before the blessed master, right? Joy for Mesilat Yesharim is about service. It's about being able to give, to serve, and to be connected to God in that way. And by the way, I think there are people who today find great deal of joy in service, not necessarily, in doing things for others. And we'll get to loving kindness and we'll get to those sorts of things. But it was interesting when I was a hospital chaplain at Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital in New Jersey. One of the first days, they asked all the chaplains, well, why are you here? And, all the chaplains, we all wanted to give this, well, we want to serve people. We want to be there for everyone else. And our supervisor actually said, okay, but what does it do for you? And there was a realization that, well, yeah, we do want to be there for other people, but I get joy out of being there for other people. And that's okay. It's a way to fulfill that a part of myself that, by the way, gets me through the hard times, right? Being at a funeral isn't joyful, but I get joy in helping people through difficult moments in their lives. And I think that is sort of what we're talking about being of service can bring joy. Okay, just a couple more ideas. Alan Marinis wrote also in With Heart with Mind, in Everyday Holy Day, actually, not with Heart with Mind, sorry. Moments come when the heart dances in the light. So much more than the experience of fun or even happiness. Joy erupts, and I love the way that right? Joy is not something that you take in measure. That's one of the ways that you can sort of, I believe, distinguish between joy and happiness. There are levels of happiness. You're either joyful or you're not joyful, right? Because joy it erupts, it's there, right? An experience touches us to the depths of our souls, and in that moment, we're graced with a vision, if only fleetingly, of the flawless wholeness and perfection of it all. We sync up with the universe. We sort of are vibrating on that same frequency for a moment, and you feel it, and it's overwhelming, and it's amazing. And sometimes then you try to spend the next X number of years of your life just feeling that feeling again. And it's hard because you don't always feel that feeling again. Rona.
I think his language differentiates between joy and happiness. If you look at the kinds of words he uses, erupts, scintillates, heart fills and flows.
Yeah.
I think his language makes that differentiation.
For sure. And Alan is very good. He's a great author. As I said, I recommended his books With Heart in Mind, Everyday Holiness, Everyday Holy Day are 3 books that he's written, and I recommend all of them. They all do different things. As Diana knows, and a number of people who learn with me, I would not do service without at some point in time quoting Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. He wrote in a response to Kitavo, the pursuit, oh, and I misspelled that, sorry about that, of joy. Happiness is something you pursue, but joy is not. It discovers you. It has to do with a sense of connection to other people. It is not impossible to feel joy alone, but it's harder. It's harder. When you're connected to other people or to God, it's easier to find that pathway to joy. It's a social emotion, he writes. And to some degree, it's an antidote to solitude, right? He writes that it's the redemption of solitude. Okay. I'm going to skip through I'll skip through the last couple ones because I just want to get to awe, the next one. Okay. We've talked in many of my classes before about the difference between fear and awe. And the Hebrew word yirah very often is translated as fear, and you shall fear God. But a better translation is you shall have awe in God. Now, why can they translate it as fear? Because we understand that awe is an emotion or a feeling that can be overwhelming. And when you are so full of awe that it's overwhelming, it becomes awful. That's where the English word, I mean, we see that switch to negativity. It's just overwhelming. But awe is also that moment that you go, wow, right? It's that wow moment. And the best place to see that is in Genesis. Jacob awoke from his sleep and he says, surely Adonai is present in this place and I didn't know it, right? And then it says, Vayirah and Manorah. It's the word awe. How awesome, how full of awe is this place? It's none other than the abode of God and the gateway to heaven. That moment that we sort of go, whoa, our mind is blown, that's that feeling that we're trying to get at in this particular midah, right? It's not reverence in the way that awe usually is framed. That's not what the midah of yirah is about. It's about being humbled by the magnificence and grandeur and everything around us in the world, right? That's where this idea of yirah ultimately comes from. Tana Debe Eliyahu connects it to joy, which is why I like to make that connection across the top of our first slide, if you remember. I felt awe within my joy, and I felt joy within my awe, and my love prevailed over all else. We could spend an entire hour-long session just on this. It is so amazing. This connection between awe and joy. And when you get that alchemy of awe and joy, it's love. It's one of the best descriptions I've actually heard of how do you describe love. And I think about it, like I remember when I fell in love with Debbie, like I was so happy and so overwhelmed by everything. And it really was. It was this mixture of awe and joy. And I found this source and I'm like, oh, I've been looking for this for 31 years. Now I can go back and tell Debbie, and I understand now. But this connection between awe and joy is there. But it's also a connection to wisdom in our tradition. The beginning of wisdom is awe of the Lord, yirah. I just kept the translation from before, even though I don't like it. All who practice it gain sound understanding. Praise of him is everlasting, right? Yirat Adonai, awe of God. And in Pirkei Avot, they also connect it to wisdom. Im ein chokhmah, ein yirah. Im ein yirah, ein chokhmah. If there's no wisdom, there's no awe. If there's no awe, there's no wisdom. So what we're seeing here is awe is a catalyst, midah. It connects us into joy. It connects us into wisdom. It because it's that mind-blowing moment, it takes us off of our routine rut path and makes us see something, learn something, acknowledge something that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise. Peter.
Is awe to you the smallness and the loneliness that could lead you to joy? You know, do you feel small? If you're in awe, do you feel small while you're in that state of awe? Is that how you?
So I was listening. I'm trying to get my feelings as you're speaking. I like the word small. I less like the word lonely, because I don't think awe is about loneliness, but awe is about smallness, right? If joy is, I'm big, right? Because it's just overflowing. Awe is sort of the opposite. Awe is, instead of inside out, it's outside in.
It's a contraction.
A little bit, yeah. So smallness I like, not necessarily loneliness. Because I can feel small and part of nature, part of God, part of a community, right? And still feel that I'm not the most important. I'm part of it. I'm a piece. And I think that's where awe comes from. A great modern teacher, Rabbi Shai Held, the head of an institute called Hadar, wrote this, and it's actually from his teacher Bernard Steinberg that it was just so brilliant, right? If fear and awe are so different, why is it the same Hebrew word? Like, what's the difference between understanding it as fear and as awe? He writes as follows: awe is what happens to fear when it stops being about me. When I fear God, in other words, I think about God's might in the ways that it could impact me. But when I hold God in awe, I think of God's might. I think only of God's might. Thoughts of how it could affect me simply fall away, right? I am in awe of God's might, but I'm not afraid of it, because I'm not worried that God's power, God's might is going to punish me or impact me or whatever in a way. It's a very interesting way of looking at it. And Heschel also sort of talks about this. And he connects it to Pirkei Avot, which is the second source that we'll look at. Fear is the anticipation or expectation of evil and pain. When I'm afraid, I'm expecting pain or evil to happen to me, right? As opposed to good. But awe is a sense of wonder and humility. One of Heschel's favorite words is wonder, right? That sense of wonder. He would translate yirah not as awe, but as wonder. It's like, wow, do I get to be a part of this? That's how Heschel would sort of translate that. It doesn't make us shrink from the awe-inspiring object, but it draws us closer. I want to be part of that. That's something that I want to be part of, as opposed to fear, which is I want to get away from that. I want to protect myself. That's how Heschel tells the difference between fear and awe. And as I said, he connects it also, because of Pirkei Avot, to wisdom. The loss of awe is a great block to insight, and he's written a number of times. He wrote a number of times in the 20th century about how he feels that that's something that we've lost. The loss of wonder, the loss of awe, he felt was the biggest threat to Judaism and Jewish culture. And he ends by saying the greatest insights happen to us in these moments of awe. All right, so we talked about joy and awe, that top line, right? And the connection between them. Now we're going to go down to the bottom line, loving kindness and compassion. Loving kindness, the Hebrew word for that is chesed. Chesed, okay? And we're going to find both of them actually in this section from Shmot. This is what's called the 13 attributes of God. Now, Peter, when you talked about the Sfirot, those are different. Those are specifically Kabbalistic attributes of not even God, of creation, right? But these specifically are the attributes of God, right? The Lord, compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, extending kindness to the thousandth generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. We say this multiple times on the High Holy Days. Okay? Chesed is the attribute of loving kindness. That's what we're looking at here. And what's interesting, an amazing source from Hosea, from the prophet Hosea, God says, I desire chesed, not sacrifice, da'at, not burnt offerings, right? Kindness instead of these offerings, right? God doesn't care about these offerings because they're supposed to be for us anyway. God would much rather have us show kindness to one another, chesed to one another. And by the way, I think one of the biggest challenges that we have, and this is what keeps Marge in business, right, is, you know, a lot of people have learned how to show kindness to others, but they don't know how to show kindness to themselves. And the attribute, the midah of chesed, is about kindness not only to others, but to ourselves as well. There's a, you know, in the Talmud, this is Masechet Beitza. The Talmud actually says that it's, if you want to get kindness in this world, you need to show it. Anyone who has compassion for God's creatures, it is known that he is of the descendants of Abraham, our father. Anyone who does not have compassion for God's creatures, he's not one of the descendants of Abraham, our fathers. Right? It's part of who we are as Jews. It's built into the way that we are supposed to be. And the other piece of Talmud that I love when it's talking about chesed, and very often it's called gmilut chasadim, acts of chesed, acts of kindness. And it says that the acts of kindness are actually superior to tzedakah. It's better to have acts of kindness than tzedakah. Why? Because tzedakah is performed only with money, whereas acts of kindness can be performed with money, with a person and with his money, both with your time and with your money. Charity is given to the poor, whereas acts of kindness are performed both for the poor and rich. Charity is given to the living, where acts of kindness are performed both for the living and dead. Actually, the ultimate display of chesed chesed shel emet. True chesed is care for the dead. Right? Making sure that they are shown respect, going through the process of tahara. That is seen as true loving kindness, because there's no possible ulterior motive. You're not waiting, you could always say, well, if I'm really nice to Michael, maybe he'll be nice to me. Right? Michael's like, nah. But obviously, when somebody's passed away, that kindness that we show is not going to be reflected back. And so it's seen as chesed shel emet. Diana.
I was going to say, I love when you're talking about this chesed and gemilut chesedim, when there's a naming or brit milah for a baby, we say, may you go, what is it, Torah, chuppah, and maasim tovim.
Right.
And it's like, from like the moment that we bring them into the Jewish world with the Jewish name, it becomes part of the fabric of the DNA, and in front of like all these people, and it's known that that's what's expected.
It's interesting.
And
I agree with
think
what
that's
you're saying. I
beautiful.
agree with what you're saying, but we could also make the argument that maasim tovim and gemilut chasadim may be a little bit even different.
Well, I
but
think it's like a Venn diagram. It's
yeah.
like, that's kind of what I'm thinking.
There's overlap for sure.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. Okay. Rabbi Chaim Zaychik writes as follows: the cornerstone of Rabbi Nassim Tzvi's service of God was chesed. Now, we talked about services connected to joy. So if you remember, why did I connect vertically joy and loving kindness? Because there is this connection, vertical, right? This, to him, meant being careful of another's honor and dignity, helping others, having one's heart overflow with loving kindness, utilizing every opportunity to benefit others. It meant that older students should learn with younger ones. Above all, it meant that one should greet his fellow with a pleasant countenance. This chesed demonstrates itself for us in the real world, in the way we treat one another. Yes, we started from a verse asking God to show chesed, but really where the rubber meets the road for us as a spiritual midah is going to be how we treat each other, right? When somebody gets under our skin, are we going to lose our temper? Are we going to find that way to show that chesed, that loving kindness? Marinus adds to this, and he says that chesed is a sustaining action, right? I like that description. It's not a one-time action, but it's something that you need to sustain. It's not enough just to show chesed and kindness to somebody today, but tomorrow too. And for him, it involves, I'm having a hard time drawing a straight line with my mouse. It involves not having that expectation of return, again, which is why the burial and care for the dead is seen as chesed shel emet. And the last piece that I liked in what he reminded us, Rabbi Eliyahu Dressler writes that the Torah starts with chesed and ends with chesed, right? Or is this actually? Oh, this is a different source. Actually, there's a different source that says the Torah starts with chesed and ends with chesed. It starts with the creation of the world and with human beings, giving them clothing and stuff like that, and then the burial of Moshe. But that's a different source that I was remembering that I didn't keep here. Rabbi Dresser writes at the beginning of his discourse, when God created man, he made him a giver and a taker. The power of giving is a higher power, and chesed is about giving, not taking. All right, I'm actually doing pretty well on time. Any questions on the first three before we get to our last? All right, compassion. So horizontally, compassion and loving kindness are similar. Vertically, we talked about awe as being causal for compassion. When we have awe in the world, it causes us to be compassionate. And compassion is also in these 13 attributes of God. And you could argue, well, isn't loving kindness and compassion the same thing? Well, obviously not, because God is both shows both chesed and is rachum, right? Is compassionate. March, did you have a question before we moved on? Unmute first, though. Always have to unmute.
I can't remember.
It's okay, I'll tell you.
Thank you. I wonder if compassion comes first.
Well, compassion, interestingly, compassion does come first in this list. Right? Compassion is here, and chesed is here. So compassion does come first here. And maybe you need compassion to come first, but in the way that I ordered it, with joy and awe, love and kindness and compassion, I needed to structure it that way. But you may be right. It's certainly, you can make the argument from this verse. So if I had to pick a biblical verse that describes compassion, it's actually a verse from Deuteronomy. And it's the verse that talks about Shiluach Haken. If a bird's nest happens to be before you while you're on your way, in a tree or on the ground, and young ones or eggs, and the mother bird is sitting on the young or upon the eggs, you shall not take the mother bird with the young. You shall let the mother bird go, and the young you may take for yourself. And by the way, it's not just let it go. I actually have a problem with this translation. Shaleach tishalach et ha'em. You shall surely, it's emphatic, you shall surely send the mother bird away. It's not just, oh, don't take them together, but don't make the mother bird watch while you're taking the eggs. That's compassion, right? That's the biblical concept of what it means to show compassion. And again, God shows compassion as well. Let nothing that has been doomed stick to your hand, in order that Adonai may turn from a blazing anger and show you compassion. In compassion increase you as promised on oath to your fathers. This is about when you go into the land and you shouldn't take things that you're not supposed to take from the cities and stuff like that. So he's saying, don't take those things, so that God, by doing that, by not showing compassion to the other people, ultimately you will not get the compassion from God. So Marinus describes compassion as follows. Compassion, he says, depends on internal connectedness that arises from a sense of shared identity. As the you and the me are mingled in a oneness that transcends our separate identities. We don't have a word in biblical Hebrew or even in rabbinic Hebrew for empathy. But this, rachamim, And the way that Marinus is describing it, that's what he's talking about. It's empathy. It's feeling what the other person feels. Right? Not sympathy, empathy. Feeling what, right? Whereas it almost separate, we no longer have two separate identities almost, because I feel what you're feeling. And because of that, I feel your pain, and I'm going to then respond to it, and I'm going to react to it. If we go back to the bird, right? The goal is not to send the bird away because God told me to, but to send the bird away because I would hate to do that to another creature. That's when you're really fulfilling the mitzvah. Not just because God told you to. All right, I guess I will. I don't care, but I will. Right? True rachamim, true compassion is when you can feel it and then you do something about it. He continues, compassion is a noble trait. And it's one of the 13 attributes, right? That's what we talked about. And the Orchot Tzadikim says everything that you can do to cultivate this trait, you should exert yourself to do. It's not even just like, sure, yeah, if you're doing it, but go out of your way to cultivate the midah of rachamim. Which again, if it isn't about, the midah isn't about the action, it's about the feeling. So it's not what I do after I feel the compassion. It's teaching yourself to feel that empathy and that compassion. And then what you do is going to flow naturally. Right? The midah isn't about the action, it's about the feeling. It's about cultivating that feeling. So we've talked about 4 of them, right? Especially with these last couple of them. There's got to be balance. God governs the world with 3 general modes of conduct. Pure kindness, which is chesed. Pure judgment, which is din. That's not something that we cultivate as a midah, but that God has as the ultimate judge. And the median conduct of rachamim, mercy. So Klalei Tchila Chochma actually understands rachamim, this compassion, to be in between the attribute of kindness and judgment. Now that's really interesting, right? Because we would say, oh, compassion is all the way to the same side as kindness. No, because compassion is within a context, right? It's that empathy of, I have to understand that person in that situation. And I understand that maybe that person deserves my anger or my scorn because they hurt me. But doing that forever doesn't do anybody any good. Maybe I need to cultivate that compassion, that rachamim, and say, okay, how am I going to get past my anger? Because I feel the way that they're feeling now too, not just the way that I'm feeling. And mitigate between judgment and kindness. And the last source that I'll leave you with today, in terms of balance, is from Bereshit Rabbah, which is a midrashic text, a Agada midrashic text on the book of Genesis. To what might God be compared? A king who had empty glasses. The king said, if I put hot water in them, they will expand and break. If I put cold water in them, they will contract and shatter. So what did the king do? He mixed hot water with cold water and put them in the glasses. So too, the Holy One of Blessing said, if I create a world with the attribute of compassion alone, no one would be concerned with the consequences of their actions. With the attribute of judgment alone, how would the world stand? Therefore, behold, I create it with both the attribute of judgment and the attribute of compassion, and hopefully it'll stand. Right? None of these are meant to be, well, that's all I am and that's all I do. These midot are about balance. These midot are about finding the right moment for any of them. And there are some midot that are more negative. I stuck with the very positive ones today. We'll deal with some more challenging ones next week. But human feelings are the full range. And as we cultivate these emotions, these feelings, these spiritual attributes, these midot, we have to figure out what's the right time and place and what's the proper alchemy for them, so that we're not responding in a way that doesn't make sense, but responding in a way that puts us in connection with our fellow human beings and with God. Questions. Next week, as I said, we will continue. I'll take us off share so that we can see each other a little bit better. We have about 8 minutes left until the end of class. Any questions or comments on what we learned today? Marge.
Hi, Rabbi.
Oh, sorry, Marge, and then Neil. Unmute yourself first, Marge. That was your reminder. Marge, you have to unmute yourself. Sorry.
I need a sign. The loss of awe is what's her Jewishness or observance or
from Heschel, yeah.
Yeah. My mother's friend wrote her PhD on Heschel and at Berkeley, and it wasn't accepted because she was a woman writing.
Okay.
This was a long time. Yeah.
Long time ago. Okay.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. Anyway, that seems very relevant. And are we working to bring that back? The concept of awe?
Look, I mean, those followers of Heschel, and I find myself one of them, in a lot of different ways, are all about finding those moments. It's ultimately what led me into chaplaincy, right? Because chaplaincy is about finding those intense moments of joy, of sadness, of right, and living in them, writing that emotion, being present in that. And so I think there are a lot of people that are trying. It's the harmony of the intellect and the emotion, and it's hard to do. It's a lot easier to be all intellectual or all emotional, but finding that harmony between them, right, where the wonder comes from an intellectual understanding of the magnitude of the world, is the way that Heschel really understood it. And it's hard to do. People having that crossover is difficult, but Heschel's argument, and I agree, is that's what Judaism's about, right? It's about the brachot, to capture the wonder, to capture the miracles, all of those sorts of things. That's where we live. Neil.
A lot of these attributes that we talked about, you need the skill of communication in order to get to these areas. In other words, you can't talk to somebody and listen to somebody, you can't understand what they're going through, and it's hard to express compassion. I think that's where conflict has a lot of problems. Nobody listens, everybody talks, and it's hard to get an understanding and compassion and mercy and a lot of these attributes without having skills to listen and communicate.
Look, what I will say with you, I agree to a point, right? I think that certainly helps. That's the way that we transmit these feelings. But I'm not entirely convinced, Neil, because what I would say is people who communicate differently than I do still have these attributes and can still sometimes show these attributes, even though we may not communicate in the same way. And I'm talking about, for example, maybe people who are on the autism spectrum, or right, they do it differently. So communication helps transmit it, but the feelings are the feelings. And even if somebody can't communicate, right? Even if somebody has aphasia and can't communicate at all, it doesn't preclude them from actually living, feeling, and cultivating these midot in different ways. So I agree with you in terms of the ease, but I think it's deeper than that in the fact that this is a human reality. These are part of who we are that we're trying to tap into. And some people do it in different ways. Diana.
I think also, like, sort of to Neil's point about communication, well, there are a couple of things. One is like how you communicate to yourself. If you have one of these moments of awe, I would say just take a moment and pause and acknowledge it and say, wow, like that was really awesome. Whether it's something beautiful you see in nature, or like an amazing, like a piece of Talmud, or a breakthrough that you had in something, because sometimes when you're really looking for them, they don't happen. They find you, these moments. And I think also about the communication aspect, I'm, as you know, a huge proponent of chavruta and having a learning partner. And like when you can start delving into text, you form a very close relationship, and you can talk about those moments like that are just so awe. And you and I have talked about that. I'll be like, oh my God, I listened to this podcast and like it was so amazing. It made me cry, like sometimes by David Lapp, or whoever it is. But having someone you can bounce that off of makes it that much more rich and meaningful. And you sort of, it's a practice, I would say, like anything that you want to get good at.
Yeah, and emotions, look, we know that both for the good and for the bad. Emotions are cumulative, right? You get multiple people that have the same emotion, and it magnifies and intensifies that emotion many fold. And we see that in joyful moments all together with everybody dancing, and we see that in the mob mentality when people go off and start looting and destroying things, right? Like when you get people that share that same emotion, all of a sudden it becomes much greater than any one person has. So I agree with that. Chavruta helps magnify, helps intensify what it is that we're learning. Rona.
I think part of compassion and understanding is reading more in a person than the language. Very often, watching a person or reading facial expressions or body language will allow you to be more compassionate, even without the verbal expression.
Yeah, absolutely. The more attuned we are, and that's where all of this goes back to it takes practice, right? There are some very few lucky people that are just naturals, right? But most of us have to practice. Most of us have to learn by making mistakes, by misreading somebody, and moving forward. And it's not the end of the world. It's one of the things that I learned as a negotiator, right? Is that there are very few things that you can say that are really wrong. There's lots of things that you can do or show, right? In that you can show that you're not listening to them, or you can show, right, that are wrong. But if you're trying and you're trying to engage with somebody and they are really hurt by something, and you say, well, it sounds like you're angry, and they're not angry, they're hurt, they'll correct you if you're willing to listen. But the idea is, are you trying to engage? Are you trying to figure it out? But it's something you have to practice, and you learn it, and you see these things on people's faces, and you recognize, oh, Yeah, I've seen that before, especially if it's somebody that you know, right? I've gotten really good at reading my what's coming from my wife. I haven't gotten good at avoiding it, but I've gotten really good at reading it, right? So yeah, the better you know somebody, the more you're gonna practice. The more you practice you have, the better you're gonna get at this. Any other questions? All right. Next week, we will do spiritual Middot 2 and go into some other aspects or other Middot. There are lots of them. And otherwise, and then we're going to get to Passover, and we'll have a few weeks of break, and then we'll finish with everything. Peter, you had a question?
Yeah. Are you going to be able to get that reading list this week, you think? Or do you want to wait till the end?
I don't really have. You mean a reading list for the books?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll wait till the end and give you that reading list at the end. That way we can talk about it, and then you guys can decide which books, and I can annotate it a little bit better. You can decide which books you want to start with, or whatever. Yeah.
Because you're whipping through all these sources so quickly.
Oh, I know.
And I'd like to be able to go back and find some of them to read.
Yeah, no, for sure. But if I give you the books beforehand, then you don't need to come and visit me on Tuesday nights.
You would still do that.
I would still come.
Thank you, Diana, for putting in the chat that this Friday night is Campfire Shabbat. Please join us at 7 o'clock for Campfire Shabbat. Whether it's raining or not, if it's raining, we'll be inside. If it's not raining, we'll be outside. And come sing with us for Campfire. All right, everyone. Have an amazing night.
I like that rainbow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the glasses.
Thank you,
Thank
Rabbi.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hi, Sylvester. Hang on a second. I'll get to you guys in a sec.
Yes.
We'll let everybody else go, and then you and I can chat, and then we can chat.
I was just going to tell you everything is cool with what, do you know what I'm
Thank
talking
you.
about?
I'm
Yeah.
glad.
Yeah.
I had heard through somebody else that it was, but I'm
Baruch
glad.
Hashem. You know why? Mashiach energy. I'm never going to stop with it.
Good.
Harry Potter has his cloak. I have my hat.
Bye, guys. Second, we will put people into waiting rooms. Okay. Hi, Sylvester. Hi, Trini. How are you?
Hi,
Hi,
good.
good.
Thank you very much for the glasses.
Good. I'm glad you like them. It's a pleasure.
Sure, always.
Yeah,
It's a
learning.
pleasure.
Thank you.
and
So we
thank
just
you-
wanted to ask you when it's a good time for us to come and
when works for you?
we have this
How many-
Sunday.
How many?
How many
doors
door
are
handles are?
It's the two front doors,
Oh, okay.
doors?
right? It's just the two.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you have time this Sunday, we can come Sunday.
Okay. Let's do Sunday. Let me look at my calendar. What time do you guys want to come?
Around 11,
Perfect.
11:30.
11 o'clock, 11:30. I will see you. Do you have my address or no?
Yes.
We went one time. Yes.
So you still have it? You still have it?
We don't have it, but
We went to your house.
we'll remember.
Okay.
I think.
If you can't remember, then just send me an email and I'll send it to you.
Okay. Thank you
Sure.
very much. Yes.
Yeah,
we'll
Otherwise,
do that.
I'll put you down for 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
At the house.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, guys.
Okay. See you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.